Well, then I'll say welcome to our third webinar, Connecting and Growth in Creating the Circle of Support for Ourselves and Our Children series. My name is Robin Starch and my pronouns are she, her. If you wish to learn more about pronouns and the use of them, we have provided for you a link in the chat. With me today is Mel Anderson, Marcella Lanzalotti, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
Go ahead, Marcella.
Hi, my name is Marcella. I use she, her pronouns. I am the program coordinator fellow at AmazeWorks. I'm doing a fellowship year, so I'm only working at Amaze till the end of July. And I've been working very closely with Mel and Robin.
Yay.
And she's awesome.
She is.
Yeah, my name is Melissa Anderson. Everyone at AmazeWorks calls me Mel. We have two Melissas, and most people in my life call me Mel, so Mel or Melissa is fine. I use she and her pronouns, and I am the Director of Curriculum and Instruction with AmazeWorks. I have been with AmazeWorks now for about 1.5 years, and I'm excited to bring this third webinar to you today with Robin and Marcella. So to get started, at AmazeWorks, we begin by acknowledging that we are bringing this webinar to you from St. Paul, Minnesota, which is on the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of the Dakota people. A land acknowledgement is a formal recognition of the unique and enduring relationship that exists between Native Americans and their territories. And by offering a land acknowledgement, we want to affirm and advocate for tribal sovereignty and commit to holding ourselves accountable to Indigenous peoples and nations. So we invite you to acknowledge the Indigenous people of the land on which you live in the chat at this time, if you know. And if you do not know who they are, we encourage you to find out more and talk about that history of colonization with children. And if you want to learn more about land acknowledgements, feel free to explore more on the website for the Native Governance Center, and Marcella will put that in the chat for you as well.
So today I hope that you will leave ready to be responsive, take action with empathy and understanding of the ideas that we share with you here today. During these uncertain times where unfortunately we're seeing an increased number of hate crimes towards Asian Americans and acts of violence in community spaces, we hope you see the importance of developing healthy, complex identities and respect across differences of your children, youth, and others that you may care for, so that they can be authentic with their connections with you and other people. It's our connections with others that helps us to navigate the many changes and transitions that we've been facing this past year. We bring these webinars to you in recognition that you are all coming to this space with your own lived experiences. And so we hope to provide for you a windows and mirrors approach so you can see yourself reflected in some of the things that we share and discuss. And hopefully you can be open with curiosity and discovery for the new insights and perspectives we might share. For people of color who join us and those with marginalized identities, we wish to provide for you a solidarian support to help you navigate some of the social and emotional work that can be done by all of us, basically to strengthen equity and belonging for all. As white women, we feel it is important for each of us to understand the long-standing history that's brought us to this spot in time right here with this racial justice movement that we are currently in. We at Amaze seek to understand our place within that history and encourage others to be able to do the same. To do that, Louise Derman Sparks and Julie Olson Edwards created this anti-bias education model. And this is what we use to help us navigate some of the current justice events. Here's how it works. We're gonna kind of break it down for you a little bit. The empathy and understanding ring is a component that helps to teach the social emotional learning skills that are needed for all. So when we can share all of who we are by the way of our healthy complex identity, well then children and families have a sense of belonging and experience affirmation of their identities and cultural ways of being. Children and adults know how to respectfully and easily live, learn, and work together in diverse and inclusive environments. The ability to notice, name, and reject bias, prejudice, and stereotypes is important. And it's the way for us to be able to explain it to kids so that they understand is by using the words fair and unfair. So taking action is that last ring, and knowing how to problem solve when we see others behaving in a biased manner towards others will help us to create a community and the skills needed to manage our diverse world that we're in. Mel, I know that that we know what the anti-bias tenets are all about, but I think it's time for us to kind of dig in and you show us how we can teach this to our children by sharing a book. So let's explore how we can have conversations about different identities and lived experiences. Go ahead, Mel.
Yeah, so some of you may be familiar with our elementary curriculum, which uses picture books as a way to have those intentional conversations with children about identity differences and bias. And one of the books in our curriculum that we can use as a way to talk about how we can help our children nurture connections with others is Adrian Simcox Does Not Have a Horse. In this book, the main character, Adrian Simcox, tells everyone at school about his horse. It has a beautiful white coat and a golden mane. And a girl in his class named Chloe does not believe that Adrian has a horse because he has holes in his shoes. He gets free lunch at school. He has a messy desk and lives in a small house in town with barely any yard. And Chloe gets really frustrated with Adrian's stories about his horse because she thinks he is lying and he's not being honest. She doesn't understand him at all and calls him out at school. And then she goes home and complains about Adrian to her mom. So this book showcases Adrian's resilience through his vivid imagination. And we learn that he comes from a low-income family. And it shows how Chloe's bias about people from low-income families gets in the way of her empathy and understanding of him. And then one day, when Chloe's mom takes them past Adrian's house on a walk, Chloe learns more about Adrian. She develops more empathy as she understands more about his creativity. And in this book, Chloe is spinning her wheels because her quality world does not match her perceived world. And Adrian, he meets his needs through his vivid imagination by imagining he has a horse. And in Chloe's quality world, people are honest, and she sees Adrian as being dishonest. This influences her perception of low-income families like Adrian's, as she lacks the understanding and respect needed to have empathy and create identity safety for Adrian. In the book, Chloe's mom is responsive, and she tries to expand Chloe's quality world and perceived world by providing an opportunity for her to develop empathy and respect for Adrian's differences. And by doing this, Chloe's mom gives her a lesson on the real world. So when our children, in our lives get stuck like Chloe, we can try inviting them to reflect on their quality world. If they are unaware of what they're doing, or they need more information, or they don't give an answer, if they fib or leave out facts, you can try asking them, what are you doing? If they complain or blame others, you can ask them, how would you like it to be? So this story shows how children can make connections and develop authentic relationships with their quality, perceived, and real worlds when they're more closely matched. So as caregivers and educators, we can do this by teaching our children lessons on that real world. This is important because in this time, there's a big disconnect between the quality world and the real world. And when we can help connect our children's quality, perceived, and real worlds, we move closer to equity. So I know that was a lot of information there. And to help us think about those aspects of the real world that we need to intentionally teach our children, I'm going to offer you a question for reflection. And this is something that we do at AmazeWorks often. It's part of all of our trainings, and it's part of all of our lessons that we write, because we really believe in that, the power of being able to reflect yourself. Okay, so someone in the chat asks, can we review what you mean by quality world? So I'm new to the curriculum and didn't quite catch it last week. Yeah, we can definitely do that. And so we think about quality world. The quality world is, you know, the world that we want and the way we we want things to be for ourselves. And our perceived world is how we see the world and how we perceive things to be. And then there's the real world. So oftentimes, you know, when we get into conflict, those three things don't match, right? The things that we want, the things that we're perceiving and seeing, and the real world. Hopefully that helps.
So another example of quality world, if I can, is there's beliefs and ways of being that we learn from our family of origin, and then there's a way that things function at our workplace. And for many people, when it comes to equity, especially if you are white, the events that happened this summer where George Floyd was murdered by a police officer, it was this wake up of, wow, there's unjust and unkind things, unfair things that are happening to the Black and brown bodies out there that I mean, I'm not aware of it. But I am aware of it now. And so it's like peeling back that onion. We can decide to explore and look into events and activities, but if it's not something that connects with us directly, then we just kind of leave it as it could be. And it's kind of what other people have to deal with, not what I might have to deal with. And so quality world is, you know, how you see it and how you set it up for yourself. You know that there's more out there, and so you function within, say, your community that you live in. But maybe if you live in an outer suburb, you never go into the cities, and there is a real world and things that are happening in the cities. So I live just 35 minutes away from St. Paul. And when I tell people that, oh, I went to St. Paul and that's where I work, and they're like, oh, you have to go so far if you're going to the cities. I'm like, it's just 35 minutes. That's just, you know, one side of, you know, 4 songs, 5 songs on a disc. And so that's the difference there, is like our quality world is just what's in front of us. That perceived world is what we know about, but we don't do anything and we don't bring it into our world. And then the real world is the bigger picture that we don't always pay attention to until we have to.
Yes,
ahead.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So back to that question for reflection. Thanks, Marcella, for bringing us back there. And we'll just give you a minute to think about this. So what aspects of the real world do you need to more intentionally teach your children about in order to help their quality, perceived, and real worlds more closely match? So just take a moment to reflect on that. All right. Hopefully that gave you a little time to think and reflect. And I think that's a question that we should always keep returning to, because our awareness of things always changes. Now, before we move on, I think it's time to put in a little activity. So I'm going to ask you to do a little movement with me, because if we move regularly and avoid just sitting still the whole time when we're listening, if we take care of ourselves, we'll have more resilience to do this important work with our children. So we're gonna do a little physical resilience activity. And so what I'm gonna ask you to do is take, you can either use the arm of your chair if you're sitting in a chair, or the surface that you're sitting on, or the tabletop in front of you if you have one. And you can stand up if you're able to. That will make it a little more creative for you. But I'm going to ask you to make contact with that surface 10 different ways with your body. So it could mean using your hands to start as one. Your elbow could be 2. Your forehead could be 3. Your fingertip could be 4. Your other elbow could be 5. You could stand up and sit on that other part if you're doing the tabletop. It could be 6. Maybe your ear is going to be 7. I think I'm losing. Chin. Chin can be 8.
I used my knee.
You use your knee. That could be 9. Maybe you can come up with some other creative ways.
My ear.
To do that. So you can challenge your kids to do that one too. And if they're, really creative with it, you could even say, do 20 of them. See if you can do 20 of them. But it's a good way to kind of reset yourself and get some movement.
So brain research, shows us that we're 20 minutes into this presentation and a lot of information's already been covered. And so one of the things that it says is that if you move your body after learning something, it just kind of keeps it to the forefront of your thinking so that when we review it, as we will, and connect the dots as we will, you'll be able to retain things. So as you teach your children about the real world and current happenings, you can use picture books to create opportunities for having discussions about different lived experiences. Now, the Resource Hub on the AmazeWorks.org website hosts a variety of support, including picture books with lessons for caregivers. You'll find video lessons for older children and adolescents. We also want to give you access to this slide. It is an awesome slide that showcases 21 books that when you click over the book cover, it will take you to the read aloud of the book. And it's a great because it's in both English and in Spanish. And these resources, along with the anti-bias lens, is a great way to start discovering and discussing a variety of identities and creating a windows and mirrors opportunity for you and those that you care for. When I answered that question for reflection, the piece that I needed to come to grips with is that there's going to be discussions around firearms, and there's going to be continued discussion around race and the Derek Chauvin trial. And so for me, it's navigating what's too much information and I have to take a break from it, or what is information that I have to seek out that helps me better handle and understand this information. And so this is another resource for you is to be able to think about what are the pieces when it comes to different identities, sexual orientation, socioeconomic differences, like in our book with Chloe and Adrian, immigration statuses, family structures. These are things that we, if we think about it and we use anti-bias education as a lens to be able to begin talking about some of these identities, it really can help set you up for success and also set your kids up for success. So, if Chloe in the story had not discovered her biases, she would have run the risk of holding on to stereotypes. And when we hang on to our biases and stereotypes, that creates what we call othering. It's a conscious or subconscious belief that someone is better than another person. We can behave to get something or avoid something, but when bias, prejudice, and stereotypes are present, then fear, oppression, resistance, isolation, mistrust, and hopelessness are the conditions that become created. And so, given the focus of creating a circle of support and creating connection and growth for and with your children, we need to not avoid conflict, or I should say discomfort, when it comes to discussing diversity, equity, inclusion for all. Um, so that part about we avoid things because it's uncomfortable, um, having conversations where we can be respectful with others is a great way to be able to help that quality world fit into the perceived world a little bit better, and even fit into that real world, so that there's not a mismatch going on. So we understand that the nature and purpose of conflict, as well as the emotions that conflict evokes, is something that we can see in human behavior, because there's a gap between our wants, the things that we want, and the things that we need. And so the things that we need are those fun, freedom, belonging, success and power, safety and security. But when we have wants, it creates a gap. And so that's going to be the focus of what we're going to talk about, is basically, what do you do when a need is disrupted? And the more that an individual drives their behavioral systems to get what they want, while under real stress, this behavior comes progressively and more random, and in an attempt to meet the needs. And what I mean by that is that I was a teacher in middle school for several years, too many years to mention, and oftentimes the kiddos would be spinning out of control, and it was because there was something that they wanted or they needed, and they didn't know how to articulate, and they didn't know how to get out of certain conflicts that they were in. And so we're all driven by our thoughts and our actions and our physiology and feelings. And when we ask ourselves, where does the control come from? Who is the person who's driving all that? Well, it's almost like having a behavior car, right? Who's driving your behavior car? Are you somebody who's able to regulate things? When we reach roadblocks and detours in our life, we might end up spinning our wheels, which will affect that ability to create a quality world for ourselves. So we're going to unpack this a little bit. So all behavior is purposeful, according to control theory, William Glasser. Humans are driven by our physiology, like I said before, our feelings, our thoughts, and our actions. And as you can see on this slide, there's actions that are happening, and kids are doing these actions either to get something or to avoid something, once again, like I had said. So due to our emotions and our cognitive and racial stages of development, children are primarily driven by strong emotions. And during times and uncertainty, it can look like challenging or unwanted behavior. Like I had said before, when I taught in middle school, the students had emotional and behavioral difficulties that I worked with. And I would ask them to make a collage of their basic needs. How do you get your need for fun, freedom, belonging, power, and safety and security met? And so they'd cut out things out of the newspaper, they'd do clip art. And a lot of the times, what the kids would do for power and success, especially some of the boys, but there were girls who did this too, they put a sports car for power and success. And oftentimes this was their picture of being successful. If I could own a race car like this. A car is a great metaphor to use with kids, because you can teach them, and it can give an understanding and an emphasis on what's self-control, and what is your behavior that controls others. When are you spinning your wheels? Each of us operates to be in control of our own behavior. And so if we take a look at the behavior card to connect all of these ideas that we've been discussing today, we use the 4 behaviors that you see in front of you: the action reaction, is in the front wheels. When our needs are met and balanced, our small little picture in our oven, consider them the pistons of an engine, if any of you know how an engine works. And so we have pistons that go up and down. And so those 5 pistons of the fun, freedom, belonging, and success and power and survival, if they're working really well, then our actions, which we have 95% control of, are going to help us to kind of move along the journey and on the road that we're traveling. And our thoughts, if we're balanced, are going to kind of go along. There's oftentimes positivity that we can find. And so when we look at the choices that we make, right? So for example, if you want to connect how actions and thoughts work, think about yourself when you're cold, right? And your body senses it, you feel it. Well, when that happens, it becomes a choice for you. You can grab a sweater and a blanket and warm yourself up or cuddle with other people if you want to, or you choose to not do anything, to not act, because maybe you're playing a game with somebody or you're watching a movie. And so you ignore that action, and the choice is yours to do nothing. Well, thinking is moderately under our control. And if we learn to master the techniques of substituting one thought for another so as to achieve emotional regulation, when you can control your thoughts, it helps to control your behaviors. And that's how this is done. So we balance our needs and we begin to become aware that when we're in amygdala hijack, that go ahead, Marcella, can you click on our guard dog? I'm not sure if he does it or not, but right now he's hyper and he's aroused and he is in amygdala hijack. Nope, click it back. I was wrong. It didn't work. And so what we want for the thinking process to happen is for that dog to just sit down and relax and look around. But our survival instincts of fight, flight, freeze, and appease, if that guard dog is up, the amygdala takes over the whole brain and we can't access our prefrontal cortex. I tell kids, our detective part of our brain, and we're not able to take in the things that we're seeing and hearing. Our watcher, our thalamus, isn't working because we're in amygdala hijack. And then our Wikipedia pages of the hippocampus, where it's our short-term memory and our long-term memory, those 3 pieces of the detective, the watcher, and the Wikipedia pages need to be functioning in collaboration with the amygdala. And if they're not, we have a tendency to not necessarily be thinking clearly, not able to problem solve, not able to regulate our emotions. And so what we have to do is think about, how do we get our needs met so that we can relax that amygdala and not be stuck in amygdala hijack. I always tell the kids when I teach this slide to them, I say, put your fist up like you're in an amygdala hijack and do a grr, like that dog would be doing, grr, you know. That's, I'm going to get you before you get me. I'm going to protect myself so that I don't get in trouble. Or I'm going to protect myself so nobody sees that I'm scared. That's the behavior. We see behaviors when we're in amygdala hijack. So for some people, this is difficult to be able to do. And recently I was working with an organization and they were practicing their norms of collaborating and how they wanted to be with each other. And so one of the things was that look for the positive, have a positive outlook onto your coworkers. And some of the people shared that sometimes that's difficult because past frustrations of conflicts or never being heard because somebody else is always speaking can get in the way of wanting to have that positive intent. And so we discuss with them this William Bridges model of transitions, where if you look at every situation as a new situation, go ahead and you can put the transitions model up, Marcella. Then what we're talking about is, how do you work in collaboration for the context of keeping it new? We need to be able to have similar perceived worlds. So when we're working or something new is coming along, we can address and collapse conflicts from the past and create an ending. Change has happened. I'm not going to bring my resentments from the past. I'm going to move into this neutral zone with positive intent as I make a journey into new beginnings, looking at this activity or project that we're working on in a positive way. As parents, we do this all the time with our kids. We might, they come home from school and transition. I'm seeing this with the grandbabies that I live with. They're having a really hard time, you know, preschoolers. They get home and it's just like all three of them are just fighting and crying, fighting and crying. And it's because the transition of coming home from school, there's tired, there's I'm hangry, hungry, you know, and angry at the same time, and just not knowing what the next transition is going to be because they had so much fun at preschool. That's an example of they're going to need to learn how to self-regulate themselves so they're not always crying when they come home from school. And so that's what we mean by transitions and looking at how to create new beginnings with things. Let go of some of those conflicts from the past and assume positive intent with each other. Otherwise, you're going to have a mismatch in our perceptions and beginning to say and have different images in your mind of how things can be, new ways of being, new images, instead of an image of, oh, that person and I never get along. Think about something that you admire about that person, or think about something that you have in common with that person. One way to have a flexible mindset is to practice emotional resilience. So Mel, if you could help us out with that.
Yeah, so we're going to do a little activity to practice some emotional resilience. And I like this activity right now because we're coming, you know, a year after being in this pandemic and all the things that have happened in the last year, and our plans have been disrupted and changed, and you know, we've had to really adjust a lot. But this activity, so for this one, you can put on a song that makes you feel hopeful or energized. And as you listen to that song, make some plans. And I'm actually going to give you a minute to do this. Marcella is going to play a song in just a sec. And I want you to think about some plans that you can make. So take some time to list things that you can look forward to this week or within the next week, within the next month, and then within this next year. And give yourself that positivity to focus on. So go ahead, Marcella, and play us a song, and we'll take just a minute to do that.
Not hearing it.
Yeah, it's a little quiet.
Can you hear it?
Nope. I think we might have needed, when you log on, you have to be able to, I could sing a song for you.
Well, that's okay.
I did share, so I don't.
Yeah.
It's fine. We can do it without the song too. But when you listen to music that energizes you or makes you feel hopeful, and you can probably all think of like your favorite song that does that for you. You know, maybe it's a song that you play when you have to like clean the house or something, or when you're in the car and you're by yourself and you just want to like sing it out. Everyone has something like that, I'm sure. But when we can do that and create that feeling for ourselves, and then when we can also focus on things that we hope for or things that we can look forward to, our brain releases dopamine, which is a helpful chemical. It helps us feel better, and it helps us fight stress. And when our brains release dopamine, we actually have an easier time connecting with others and forming connection.
So if we go back to that quality world again of that sports car, right? Well, sometimes our quality world does not match our perceived world. And when it doesn't match, there's this. Or even worse, it could be that in communication, identifying safety and having bias or creating conflict, and the image of our behavior car, as my students used to say, when a new student would come in and there was constant conflict happening, they would get nitpicky and pick apart every little thing. They would say, you know what you need to do? You got to stop spinning your wheels and deal with the junk in your trunk. And what they meant by that was knowing about the quality world, knowing about meeting their basic needs, and then how that behavior car functions. They know that when stressed, we respond through our physiology. We sweat, breathe heavily, or swallow. We experience an adrenaline rush with things, or we get tired, sleep, experience physical intimacy. When dealing with conflict or stereotype threat or miscommunication happens, we spin our back wheels of the behavior car because we can only gain control of our feelings and physiology through the use of our thoughts and our actions. It is impossible to directly change our feelings without being able to focus in on your thoughts first, because there's always that split second of you see something and you respond to it with a thought first, and then comes the emotional response. And so the trick really is about how is it that we might be able to do an activity like what Mel just said, where we take time, just a minute and 20 seconds to listen to a song. We take time to have a minute and 20 seconds of silence. Or we take time to just reflect on positive things that we're looking forward to. Those little acts of emotional resilience, if we practice those things, it's going to help us when we're in a moment of stress, that our brain is going to be able to stop and then think, especially if we put a breath in there, so that we're able to change our mood and our feelings, or at least keep them in a neutral zone if need be. If you do not want to listen to music, the song that we were playing maybe would have bugged you and it made you not sit still. And for that 1 minute and 20 seconds, judgment kicked in. And so that's the difference between having emotional regulation. When our physiology kicks in, where we start to get sweaty, it's because there's some subconscious or conscious thoughts going on inside our head that creates a physiological response. So the behavior car is this great metaphor that we use with children and for adults as well, to teach them to regulate their own emotions. This also practices creating internal. I'm going to go back for just a second. We're going to look at the behavior car for a minute. So I was talking before, but like I said, those front wheels are actions and our thoughts we're in control of. And when we're not in control of our actions and our thoughts, then we spin our back wheels where physiology and feelings kick in. So if we have balanced needs and we're able to be aware of and understand stereotype threat or bias that's happening, or change that's happened like COVID and having to go to school at home and then switching it up again and having to go to school back at school, but you have to wear masks and you have to stay so many feet apart from each other. It's all those changes that if we practice being aware of our behavior car, that we can manage those transitions, and we're actually the one driving, not spinning our wheels, and we're able to take this journey with each other because we increase our vocabulary and awareness. So go ahead to the next slide. Regulating your own emotions, and especially, I mean, that's what we're there for our kids, is to teach them how to recognize and practice creating internal motivation to meet their needs. When anyone spins their wheels, they're having large feelings. And so vocabulary awareness of how to express those emotions in healthy ways to help with problem solving abilities is really important. So let's practice. I invite participants to share a recent example of a conflict that they had with their child or that they saw their child having. And we can talk it through and connect how the behavior car, where they were at when they were spinning their wheels. So go ahead and put in the chat, or if there's someone who wants to unmute and just give me maybe a 5-sentence or 3-sentence of, there was this situation and it was about this. This was the conflict. And then Marcella, if you want to click on, well, actually, let's leave it here first. Is there anything in the chat?
Not yet.
Okay, I'll give us one. Hitting. Somebody took somebody's toy, and the response was hitting the person. And so when you look at the emotions right here, if your children know what emotion they're experiencing because it was so impulsive and they hit, right? If they know that they're angry or that they're mad or that they're jealous or that they're frustrated, it can be a way of having a conversation. Marcella, you want to click back to the behavior car? Keep thinking of other examples besides hitting, right? If we know what their emotions are, then, and that they're spinning their wheels, right? I was so mad. They can tell you, like you can see them do their fists like this. You can see them, and they oftentimes will say, I'm gonna hit you, you took my toy. And you can see them like going to hit. I'm thinking about my 4-year-old grandbabies, and it's pretty interesting the slow motion that they go through when they're gonna do something they know they're not supposed to do. And so the spinning the wheels happens. And so this is a great teachable moment to be able to talk about, what do we believe in our house about being kind to each other? I know, but he took my toy. It's like, well, we're going to talk to both of you here because I think both of you are frustrated. One thing happened and then you reacted to it. And so we got to talk to both of you about how you can react in a different way so you're not spinning your wheels. And so you get a chance to talk about the needs, sharing how you can take turns. If you hit each other, you take away the belonging you have with each other, or you break a family rule of being kind to each other. So this awareness of feelings can help navigate. Anything in the chat to unpack with the behavior car?
No.
Okay, give me a thumbs up if you get how the behavior car connects with what we've been talking about when it comes to stress. Just want to make sure. Marcella, do you see thumbs up? People get it?
I don't see any thumbs up.
Okay. So let's move to slide 51. And like I said, hopefully this will make it even more clear for you. When you've talked about what the beliefs are in the home and you've discussed the different emotions, then you can ask kids when something happens, like, whoa, what do we believe? And if they're not answering, then you can just say, well, we talk about being kind to each other, or we talk about being responsible, doing our chores, or we talk about, whatever the beliefs might be. And then asking, do you believe it? And sometimes they say no, and that's okay. It's a process. Sometimes they say yes, and then you go on to the next question. If you believe it, do you want to fix it? And a lot of times the answer is no, because they're still mad. Well, you get to feel mad, but let's, be mad without hitting anyone. And you let me know when you're done being mad, or can I help you so that you can process your feelings, so that you wouldn't say process to a kid, but can I help you with your feelings is what you might say. So like after Chloe and her mom visited Adrian, these questions would have been an excellent conversation. By doing so, you let your kids know and the youth that you're working with that it's okay to make a mistake and that we learn from them, those mistakes that we made. And so as to not cause them or anyone else harm in the future, how can we take it apart a little bit? Also, if you as adults are sharing your own personal experience with kids and youth about mistakes you might have learned from, and it creates this shared experience of connection. What, you did that too? And how did you handle it? And was it hard? And you get to talk about your emotion, and that in that any given moment, an individual is using all of their behaviors to act on the world that's coming in at them as living beings. And you got to include yourself in that, right? To get what you want in that moment, how are you handling it? Are you avoiding it, or are you doing the behavior to get something? And if so, think through when it comes to the behavior car. Are my needs met? Do I feel some bias going on here? Was this personal? Is this person not in my quality world because they're not kind? Or is this person someone that I can fix it with? Because we can talk it through by using these restitution questions that I've given you the example of. So the circle of security is a frame that we talk about for our children and for any attachment, really. It's like we're that secure base, and we release our children, the people that we care for, to go and to explore, have fun. Constantly are saying, hey, watch me, or they look back to see if we're watching. And when they feel like you trust them to be able to navigate their world and have fun and explore by you smiling and having laughter, then if something serious happens, they're going to come back to you because you're that safe haven. And they want for you to be with them in collaborating. And when it comes to making a mistake or being in conflict, it's that way of connecting with each other and creating a safe haven is discussing why are they spinning their wheels? What do they need help with so that they can get back on track and keep driving down that journey of life that they're experiencing? So, Mel, tell me what might be something we can do after those pieces of information. It's going to help us to remember what we've just talked about.
Yeah, so it all comes back to, forming connections. And so the importance of having fun together and playing with and holding and sharing and, creating that happiness with your child that cannot be overstated at all. So when we interact, through smiles and laughter and touch, that's important to our child's development. It's just as important as food or sleep, because that helps to release oxytocin from the brain, which is, the love chemical. It helps fight our cortisol, that stress hormone. And so I'm going to show you a little activity that you can do with your children. Hopefully you can, I have to make sure I can be seen. And for this activity, you need a piece of string or yarn. I actually just grabbed a piece of ribbon that I have sitting near me. And you would hold one end and then give the other end to your child, or you don't have to do this with your child. You could do it with anyone really that you're close to, that you're feeling that you need to make a connection with. And as you hold your end, you would wrap your end around your hand. And as you do that, name something about your child or that other person that you like. So give them a compliment, tell them something you like about them. And then ask them to do the same. So then as they're wrapping their hand around the other side, they're going to give you a compliment or tell you something that they like about you. And, you can do this like a few times, because depending on, how big your hands are and how long your string is, it might take a while for you to get your hands to each other. But when your hands get to each other and they meet, clasp your hands together and take turns saying something that you like to do together. What is something that you enjoy doing together? And maybe, you like playing outside with your child, and maybe they like reading books with you, or whatever it is. But giving those affirmations back and forth to each other is really important. And then that clasping of the hands, that creates that connection. And then after you do that, you can unclasp your hands and unwind the string. But as you unwind that string, take turns naming something that you each look forward to doing together in the future. So maybe you're looking forward to a certain event, or something that's coming up this summer. And so we are leaving thinking about what you're looking forward to in the future together. So feel free to try that one.
All right. So we've kind of been going through a bunch of different things. The bottom line is they're never too young to be talking about race or lived experiences that are different from your own. And so this is a great information sheet along that we'll be sending with an evaluation for your feedback. And we'll send this slide deck so that you can have the resource of the many different things that we talked about. And I'm going to read to you, we're going to go ahead, show the next slide if you could, Marcella. I'll read to you from this racial identity development on the far right column. It's important that when you receive these resources to look back over the whole slide to see the social emotional developmental stages and the cognitive thinking developmental stages of children, along with the racial identity development, because it can create clarity for you as to why we can begin conversations about identity, difference, and bias. And it also gives us insights into how to meet their needs, depending on the developments that are provided on this piece right here. And it also gives an insight as to why our children are struggling or maybe in conflict or managing big feelings. So I'm just going to read a few for you. Highlight: by 6 months, babies notice race and gender. Toddlers are quick to pick up on cultural norms about gender and apply them to roles and activities and toys when they're playing. As young as 2 years old, children will use racial categories to reason about people's behavior. So for example, if I see a person who perhaps is in a wheelchair, a person who is differently able-bodied, and if my reaction would be that of surprise or shock or a negative facial expression, that communicates something to a child that then is a disconnect. Is like, what's going on here? And so it's real important when we meet people with different lived experiences that we do our best to be neutral and to be able to navigate or be positive as well, so that they're picking up on the cues that all people are welcome and accepted here. So the next slide, if we go through, I just want you to take a look at it. It's here for you as a resource, looking at those different key pieces of identity development is really an important piece. Oftentimes people will say, no, my kids are too young. We got to wait until they're in high school. Well, by high school, it's too late, because already they begin to develop biases and prejudice if things haven't been discussed. Age 3 to 5 years old express racial bias from the experiences that they've had. And it's whether it's a positive bias or a negative bias depends on the people around them. Go ahead and share the next page. The one fact that I'm going to point out about 7-year-olds is that 30% of children understand that stereotypes can lead to discrimination. And by the age of 10, it raises to 90%. So we got to be having these conversations. Next slide, go ahead. Most important one that I wanted to point out here is that by age 9 and 10, children are very aware of who's in the in group and who's in the out group. And they can tell when the group is treated unfairly or an individual is treated unfairly because of their differences, and who has the position of power and either creates acceptance or creates rejection in groups of people. The last one that I want to point out is for adolescents. They become acutely aware of race and how their school and classes are organized, who's in the advanced classes, who's not, who sits with who in the lunchroom. The stereotypes and biases and devaluing messages about self and others are very prevalent at this age. And so helping to make sense so that when they're out there on their own, if you've been able to like really create honesty and trust and working towards justice for all with your kids, they're going to be able to navigate adolescence when it comes to diversity in a really well supported way. Mel, I'll let you wrap things up.
Yeah, and so, by doing this and by, continuing to build our own resilience skills and foster a positive mindset, and we can do all that through intentional activities, and that helps build our emotional, social, physical, and mental resilience. And with these resiliencies, we're able to shift our thinking. It helps us, our brains release that oxytocin and dopamine that we talked about, those good chemicals that fight off cortisol, which is the stress hormone. And when we can manage our stress and help our children learn to manage theirs, we can move more easily towards growth when it comes to significant change or adversities that they face. And so along with those examples of resiliency skills that we've talked about, there's a couple of slides here that we've included just so that we can share them with you. I'm not going to take a lot of time to talk about them because I see that we're getting really close on time. But we will be sharing this slideshow with you, so feel free to go back into these two resources here. But the How to Evaluate books through an Anti-Bias Lens and the Anti-Bias Education Helpful Hints is something you can come back and peruse at your own time. But as we wrap things up, you know, to think about as caregivers, we can create those conditions for belonging. When we see what is missing, it can help us discover the purpose of the child's behavior. So when children exhibit fear, we need to create identity safety so our children can develop a healthy identity. We need to stay curious. We need to be mindful of our expectations, keeping in mind, you know, what's normal and natural developmentally for our children at different ages. Because we know that when oppression exists, we know oppression exists. And when we know oppression exists and we can raise equity-minded children who discover their own and others' complex identities and differences, and are also aware of how to recognize and reject bias. And if we come to this from a place of privilege, we can make sure we are always revisiting our own awareness of how identity and biases show up for ourselves. It's our job as adults to be responsive to the needs of our children and what's happening in our world in order to build their trust. And with that, our children will learn to develop authentic, meaningful relationships and connections with lots of different people, which mitigates the risk of isolation for themselves and others. And so with your guidance as caregivers, they can learn to recognize respect and how it looks different for people depending on their culture or their lived experiences. And when this happens, we see less resistance and more openness. So with resiliency, you can nurture connection and ability to take action against racial injustice or any other injustice. When you teach and model this for your children, they're going to be ready to take action and not live in hopelessness.
We'll leave you just with this one thought. If you look and you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions. And we hope that we've given you a lot of resources so that you can take action and be able to have conversations and navigate growing your quality world so it matches the perceived world, and even growing your quality and perceived world so there's a greater match with the real world that's out there. And do so with positivity and resiliency so that it then goes, it's like a ripple effect, right? You throw a pebble in the water and the ripple goes out. Well, having positive resiliency during tough times is like that ripple effect. This is the time where we get to answer any questions. And so I really do hope you can either put your camera on or write something in the chat. If you want us to go back and kind of clarify anything for you, we certainly can. If you're interested in other things that we do, you can take a look at our website because we do have books and resources on our, as we said before, our hub page that very specifically lessons that can help you talk about race. Deborah, did you want to share anything or have a question for us? Oh, you're on mute. Take your mute off. I can't hear you. There you are.
No, but I just wanted to say how much I appreciate the three lessons that you've provided. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, well, we appreciate you coming. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
It was fun to create for you.
Thank you.
Marcella, you want to show the resource page, and then we'll go back to the other two slides. I just want to point out a lot of the work that we do at Amaze is to, it's consulting with municipalities and corporations and working in schools where we have, for each grade level, there's 20 book boxes that have different stories of lived experiences and then lessons to go along with it. And so, as noted before, Julie Olson Edwards and Louise Derman Sparks has written 2 books that we have taken that anti-bias education model and put it together with a lot of other research to talk about how we can create resiliency for teachers and for adults who are navigating tough times. And when things don't seem secure and safe, trying to have that resiliency and positive outlook and an anti-bias mindset can help, so that we have just deeper connections with people. So I just wanted to make sure that since everybody was still here, you got a chance to see some of the resources that we pulled from this new book that's Permission to Feel. I love this book. It's one of the many books that I purchased during the pandemic shutdowns. I did get a lot of reading done. Any other questions you have? Go ahead, Marcella. You can go back to your other slides. I made you jump out of order, but you're really good at that. So, nope, go forward. Nope, go back. Nope, go forward. Nope, go back.
I'm actually going to put the link to our e-newsletter sign up in the chat if anyone wants to sign up for it. We send out a newsletter every single month and would love to have you join us there.
I don't think we'll be doing another webinar for, well, at least 3 months. We have some projects and some new curriculum that we're writing. But these have been fun to do. We did 4 webinars in May, and those are recorded and are on our website. And then we did these 3 webinars, and so I'm not quite sure when we'll be at it again. But the newsletter is a great way to be able to just look at what kind of research we've discovered and bring your attention maybe where it brings in that real world a little bit to your attention so that you can spend a little bit of time thinking about some of the things. I know we juggle a lot. And sometimes for me, there's just comfort in knowing that I have a little bit of information so that when I need to, I can navigate some of the tough stuff that's going on in our world.